Welcome to the Always Better Than Yesterday podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Hartley. This podcast exists to equip and inspire your heart-centered leadership. Every week, we bring interviews with some of the greatest heart sets and mindsets on the planet. I hope the heartprint of our time spent together is that it creates new possibilities for you and all those you come into contact with. If you'd like to explore what we could make possible for you, then head to abty.co.uk/connect and book in a free 30-minute call to begin our journey together. I just want to express a huge amount of gratitude to our sponsors, Exhale Coffee. I have been a big fan of Exhale Coffee since meeting Alex and the team back in 2022. Exhale is the first coffee to be sourced, roasted and lab tested specifically to maximize its antioxidant and anti-inflammatory potency. An independent lab test has shown that 1 cup of Exhale Coffee has the same antioxidant power as 1.8 kilos of blueberries or 55 oranges. I'm a huge fan, and Mrs. H loves the decaf, especially because she knows that Exhale use the mountain water decaffeination process, which uses only pure glacial water from the highest mountain in Mexico and no nasty chemicals. Simply head to exhalecoffee.com/ABTY for your special offer. And lastly, before I introduce this week's guest, please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It would really help us leave a greater heartprint on this world. On episode 275, what a joy it is to welcome Seth Pepper to the podcast. Seth is a high-performance mental coach, and he is working with the world's leading athletes and organizations. At the age of 14, Seth began swimming, and 6 years later, he became one of the fastest swimmers in the world. He became world champion and a Hall of Famer. Seth achieved his dreams, and amazingly, he coached his brother to also become a national and world champion. The tools he learned and used to produce these impossible results are part of his unlimited potential process, which is applying with individuals, coaches, teams and companies, including the PGA, NFL, NBA, Olympics, Formula One, Netflix and Marvel Studios. It's an incredible conversation. Is episode 275 with Seth Pepper. Seth, welcome to the Always Better Than Yesterday podcast. How are you, brother?
I'm doing great. It's wonderful to be here.
Really good to see you. I have a whole list of accolades from your website of who you are, or maybe how the world or the achievements. But I want to know, like, who did you have to become before all those achievements and accolades became possible?
That's a wonderful question. I've always felt like what we choose to be the vehicle that we travel in, it just happened for me to be sports.
Yeah.
The before and after, the character arc of my life is probably, I have lovely parents. But I think the one area that was always kind of curious was that they didn't have a lot of confidence, if I was completely transparent. My mom was, you might say, clinically depressed. And so that started me off with this sort of curiosity, because I think I had this inherent sort of, wanting to do extraordinary things, like extraordinary achievements. And so there was this sort of pattern difference between my mom and myself, possibly my dad. My dad was always really supportive and loving, but also lacked in confidence. So I think that I was on this trajectory to try and find out, first of all, follow my motivation, take, as it says behind, unlimit my potential. That's something I tried to live by. It popped into my head when I was, I think, about 6 years old. Was always this curiosity of, what if I didn't have a limit to my potential? What would I go do? How far would I take it? And so I think my parents created this sort of interesting mix of things, of seeing contrast. And then also my dad is really into self-development. So he would supply me with all kinds of, some of the people that have been on your show or some of the books that he would provide for me.
That's amazing. Love that full circle. It's It's really interesting, isn't it? Because, I've been fortunate enough to interview, some great athletes and people like Dr. Michael Gervais, and it's really interesting the difference between, and I think you obviously have a career now, which we'll get to, where you're supporting and coaching elite athletes, right? But so many people have achieved that worldly success from a spirit of unhealthy mentality, like a almost like an obsession, but an unhealthy obsession, and have been quite unwell doing it. Like, how do you relate to like kind of your time, your career? Obviously, there was no such thing as kind of social media when you were like the world's best. Like, were you just like supremely physically gifted? Did you have a mentality? Was mindset even a thing? Like, how do you kind of unpick your journey to being like the best in the world at what you did?
Well, yeah, I started from a place again of being the learner.
Yeah.
So that, if we go back to the beginning, um, sounds like it's out of a movie, but it was my life. At 14, I decided I want to go after the Olympics.
Yep.
I want to be an Olympian. There was something about the Olympic environment, the Olympic dream, and I wanted to go take part in that. But my parents were not athletes; they were
Mm.
artists. And my mom was an author. My dad built classical guitars. So
Wow.
all of a sudden I said I want to be one of the great athletes in the world. They really treated it more like a hobby, which was perfect because I was self-motivated. So at 14, I just started with this curiosity, and I relate a lot to Kobe Bryant, his journey. Once he got into storytelling and shared more and more of, his sort of path, was this curiosity of, can I go do that? So it wasn't a place of anyone ever telling me that I could do that or even spotting me as having talent. I was never
Mm.
that guy. That person. When people said, "Oh, you look like a fish. You should be a swimmer." That never happened. So studied the Olympics, and I come from a small town, so I was just trying to find a sport that I could actually do. So swimming is one of those main events of the Summer Olympics, and timing. I've always trusted timing.
Mm.
I think that's a big part of my coaching is that yes, there's a lot of the mental aspect, but I also say that there's a lot of the magic as well. So
Mm.
you can be really good at something and then strive to win, and then winning can always seem like it's just out of reach, right?
Mm.
And so you need a bit of magic. You could call it luck, you could call it belief, all these different elements. And that's what, I was always curious about is, okay, I have this idea. What's going to happen next? I had the why.
Mm.
I didn't know the how, and I allowed to not know the how. Um, and this girl, it was timing. She won the gold medal, and I just basically was watching her interview, and it was in my head. What do I do next? And the announcer said what was in my head, which was he asked her, "What if there's someone out there that wants to go do what you did? What would you recommend?"
Yeah.
In timing, I said, "Okay, this is it. This is the answer. Sky's parted. This is it." And she said, "Well, I went through a YMCA. So that's a youth athletic club that we have throughout the United States. And so we had a local Y. And I was like, okay, I'll do that." So I go down to the local Y, walk up to the head coach. I tell him my vision, because your thoughts become your words,
Mm-hmm.
become your actions. So my
Mm-hmm.
thoughts were very clear. I want to go to the Olympics. And he smiled because, by then I was 14. I'm pretty tall, and to be saying those things so bluntly, you don't hear that very often.
Mm.
Um, and he asked, do you know how to swim? And I said, no. And he started laughing, but he was a good sport. So he sent me to the little kids lane, these tiny little 8-year-olds who were very good,
Yeah.
very well compared to me. I didn't even know how to swim. And so the reason why I put that in reference
Mm.
is because I was losing all the time, but
Yeah.
because I didn't have a past. I had only this now. And so I was the learner from the very beginning. And
Mm.
I kept that attitude because eventually I did achieve a lot. But my coach, who ended up becoming the head of USA Swimming and then also the Olympic coach at one time. He was in charge of like all 5 Olympics that Michael Phelps was on. But I remember he pulled me aside and he said, you know, the thing that's so unique about you is that I've seen you get more excited from a really bad loss that you learned a lot from
Yeah.
versus an easy win where you
Yeah.
didn't learn a whole lot. And so I was turned on by learning.
Yeah.
And that's what really makes you, you know, it's ironic. Like now that's what I'm coaching people on a lot of times is, you know, let's not take the results personally. Let's look at things as a lesson. Because if you're, you know, let's say you stop doing your sport, you're going to have to go find another activity and you're going to be learning from that activity. So why don't we just use your sports as a self-development tool? And so that's the way I perceived, you know, from the very beginning was, can I go do that? And then my dad, he provided this book. It was always different self-development areas of life. This one was on memory, and it had this well-known study back in the day. They had 3 test groups of basketball players, and they were shooting free throws. One group was physical. All they did was shoot shots. And then they had another group that was mental and physical. And so that was the first time that I got introduced to this idea. Wait, I could train my mind? I didn't even know that you could do that. And then there was another group that didn't even touch a ball. All they did was mental training. And the results came back. The lowest scoring was the physical only. The mixed group was the highest, but this group over here that they did this mental training and they were almost as high as the top group. That's what started me. That's what sparked me. And then I went down the rabbit hole. I was like, this is it. So my entire career was based on this foundation of training the mind and the body. I didn't, you know, implement it later on. It was, no, this is how we start. And so the subconscious mind is a big part of that. And so for me, it was as simple as going, this is way before vision boards were popular or any, you know. So I took a Sports Illustrated. It was an Olympic edition. There was an Olympian in there, Pablo Morales, and I cut his picture out, put it on the wall, and then I got my picture and I put it up and I made it so that pictures were touching. So that it would be this constant thought. It's kind of like a Post-it note. You know, Post-it notes are these bright colors that you can put visually and they trigger a thought. So to me, that's as simple as it was. I just want to think about the Olympics and I want to be able to see myself doing that and make that normal. So if you fast forward, I ended up becoming the best swimmer in my state. And then I went to university, and my second year at university, I was racing the Olympic gold medalist and beating him the whole race until the final stroke. So that's 6 years of learning how to do something, to racing against the best on the planet and being able to compete. And then I became eventually the national champion and eventually #1 in the world. And, you know, was able to realize a lot of these dreams. And, you know, one cool story of the connectivity of everything, depending on your belief, you know, I'm, you know, working with people flexibly of just finding this sort of magic space. When I won the national championship, Pablo Morales, this Olympian that was on my wall, he was there to hand me the trophy.
Yeah, of course he was. That's mad.
That's the way it happens, right?
That is mad. That's mad. But as far as I know about your story, you didn't make the Olympics. How was that? Or how did you, as a young man, how did you wrestle with that realization?
Well, yeah, I was about to say that this Olympian came into my life twice. He handed me the trophy first, victory, and then he handed me defeat because he came out of retirement. And, you know, it'd never been done before. Back then, you didn't even think that, you know, you're done, you were really done. And then I heard the murmur that, hey, did you hear Pablo's coming back? And I was what? He's coming back. So I had to race my idol for the Olympic spot. it was just exciting to be in the same pool as him.
Mm-hmm.
And here I was racing him. He beat me, missed it by about 2 inches, basically. He went on to win the Olympic gold. I had to watch it on TV.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that those things happened for a reason. I think that they taught me, the character building.
Yeah.
A lot of what I try to work on with people is to be able to be outcome independent.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a challenge. That was definitely a challenge. Uh, for me now, it has created this spark inside of
Mm.
curiosity of, yeah, I achieved a lot. These tools work really well. Like, wow, if I would have known this tool would have been the game changer. And so I have a number of things that I've discovered along the way. Again, it's pattern recognition for me. So I study the greats,
Mm.
the Phelps, the Tiger Woods, the Michael Jordans, the Kobe's, that, all these different people,
Yeah.
the Gretzky's. And I see this blueprint, I call it the blueprint of greatness.
Mm-hmm.
You see this pattern, and that's the part I wish I would have known. So
Mm.
a lot of it comes from the essence of, I wish I would have had me in my life.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes the greatest purpose that we manifest is that which we needed ourselves, whether that be in our life, in our parenting, in our leadership. It's just seems to be a universal truth. And I've seen all the organizations that you've worked with and you're serving, and that's one of the things I was curious about is what connects the NBA, the MLS, the Formula. I have a huge interest in this household in Formula One, and Lewis Hamilton's my guy, and I'm much like you. I'm always listening to the interviews very closely to the words they say, any tips, any. And I think Max Verstappen at the weekend, he didn't have a particularly good day. I think maybe staying up too late gaming was probably not good for him. And he was having a bit of a tantrum, but yeah, it's really powerful. I'd love to know, your at what point you decided that because it's a bit of a different skill set, isn't it? Required, transitioning from being performer to someone that's helping others perform at their best. How did you find that transition?
But it's interesting because um, I didn't go to do what I'm doing now.
Hmm.
I think that's why it's probably very powerful and genuine.
Mm.
Um, for me, what ended up happening was when I was done with my sport, I didn't realize how much my identity was
Mm.
connected to the results.
Hmm.
And so when it was over and I was no longer Seth the swimmer, because everywhere I went, people would introduce you to have this sort of,
Mm.
presence, story. When I no longer had that identity, all of a sudden, who is Seth? I had no clue. I didn't see it coming.
Mm.
A lot of people don't see it coming
Mm.
because you go all in with this focus, this intense laser,
Mm.
it really works well. But yeah, on the flip side, again, I didn't have anyone on the outside saying, you know what, you could be even better at your sport if you knew who you were outside the sport. You'd have a balance, and then also you transition well, you
Mm.
know. And so I started having debilitating panic attacks. I couldn't get in a car without having to. I lived in Los Angeles at the time, so you can imagine everywhere you go, you have to drive. And so I'd have to pull the car over, walk around the block for an hour, maybe even longer, just to, calm myself down, work out my system. Um, and so I always embraced everything as a blessing in
Mm.
disguise. And so for me, I didn't want to medicate it.
Mhm.
I wanted to learn from it. And so I just became curious, and I got involved in a cool support group where all of us were kind of working through, what is fear? What is this trigger? Where's this anxiety coming from?
Mm.
Um, and taking literally baby steps towards it and learning, oh, okay, even though I started to walk towards the car and get triggered, I come back to the group, and, you take notes and you share, and, everybody has some people were spiders, some were elevators, but we were all dealing with fear.
Yeah.
And you learn to kind of basically coach yourself towards the discomfort, towards the fear that you didn't die. And what ultimately set you free, the blessing of it, was that you don't have control over the outcome. The only control you have is to let go of control. And
Yeah.
so ironically, that's what I use with people now, is to be able to let go of control. There's a false sense of, in sports, especially like a sport that's, so perfecting as, like, say, swimming, because the pools
Mm.
are pretty static, environments. And so it gives you a false sense of
Mm.
control.
Mm.
And life has a way of spinning out of control the more you need control. And so if someone in the space of sports has, like, the yips, you hear a lot
Yeah.
about the yips.
Yeah.
I can resonate with that. I can understand that. I've been through that. My fear is the thing that I needed to move towards so that I could prove that I had made it up in the first place
Mm.
and move through it. And so, yeah, that's been very interesting. And so when I was done with sports and I went through this transformation into understanding who I was, I let all that go. The old, you know, personality had kind of been buried, the athlete. But someone had been at the university and saw the Hall of Fame and the record books and said, "Is that you?" And so
Yeah.
I started telling the story. And once I started telling the story, then people really encouraged me to tell it more, larger audiences. Um, and I think that that's really, where it all came about, was just, I think people, get inspired possibly by it, and maybe they get some tools from it, some hope from it. And yeah, it's been one of those things that found me rather than me finding it.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I think there's so much to revel in the paradox, isn't it? That I think sometimes, like, the ego just wants this security, this safety, and it is based on the illusion that we are not that. It's based on the illusion that we are not safe, that we're not secure, that we're not loved, that we don't have all that we need. And
Mhm.
yeah, and sometimes to be able to take a step back and just go, because you mentioned the word programming, is what's playing out here? What story am I bringing to the surface around what this means? Because it's probably not whatever's going on in this moment. I'm applying years worth of stories to this situation, and dare I say, most of us will have grown up with some form of wound or trauma, whether that's a big T or a little T, and whether we realize it or not, I imagine these play out at the highest levels of pressure. I think, one of the conversations I have with my coach is like, there's almost like this pyramid of, you've got good, you've got great, and then you've got legendary, world class, legendary, elite, greatest of all time. Like, and my coach kind of says, as you go up this level of greatness, so does the increasing pressure to be true to who you are. Like, I imagine the external pressure to be truly Leo Messi whilst he's about to take the penalty, to the pressure of the judgment and the scrutiny, or even the pressure, shall we say, of some of the political people in your country that just seems to be burning itself to the ground, to be true to who they are with all the scrutiny, all the judgment of the media. Like, that is, I guess, something which is great to have someone like you in their corner, because you're going to support them through the, like you said on your website, the knowing of who you are, but also on the outside of what you do. On the outside, I am not just this body. I am not just this performance. I am not just this trophy cabinet. I know of who I am. And I think the thing I love about the bit that I've seen you write about is that when we know that we are part of something bigger, it allows us to play within the game. It allows us to play with, I think you called it, reckless abandon. It's almost like I can play do or die, knowing that I'm not going to die. That's freedom.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's it's definitely been interesting to be able to, you had Clyde Brolin on
Yeah, yeah,
your
yeah.
cast, In the Zone.
Yes.
So had a wonderful conversation with him. We have the same healthy obsession. When humans are at their best, you
Yeah,
know, they're in their body, but they're also out of their body, right?
yeah.
And so what I realized for me, my personal experience of this was when I was at university going against that gold medalist, I ended up getting second. And then that felt amazing because, wow, this guy is the best in the world. Well,
Mm.
the next year it happened again. The,
Wow.
the next year it was very frustrating. Here we go again. So by the third time, this is my final year, my final chance, something happened where I was standing behind the start and, I won't use the actual word, but I don't cuss that often. But I said, F this race, F the all of it. I'm effing taking this.
Yeah,
And it wasn't the aggression that you would normally attach to those words. It
yeah,
was
yeah.
it's a peace.
A declaration.
Exactly. And my aunt, who had never seen me compete, she's from New York and we're from, Arizona and Oregon. And so she had gone to this final race and she said, just the way you stood behind the start, I knew you had already won the race. There was something just so solid about you, that poise, right? And I got up on the blocks and I dove in and it was the flow, it was the zone, it was being present in your body, out of your head, all of those. And I
Mm.
was going, it was you brought up racing. It was like I had been in an F1 car and I didn't even know that that extra gear was there. I did
Mm.
I didn't because I had always made it about me.
Huh.
And then when I had this experience, when I just effed it all, right?
Yeah,
I moved beyond all the knowing.
yeah.
And as they say in Star Wars, when Obi-Wan says to Luke Skywalker, trust the force, that's based on mythology, which is allow the life force to flow through you,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Or in the faith-based space, it might be um, allow God, right?
Mm.
And so whatever it might be for each person,
Mm.
it's a moment of transcendence.
Mm.
And it's a religious, spiritual, non-ego experience. And so that's what's been the gift, is that unwiring that, I've been able to, first of all, make it very normal, which I think is really important. Because I hear people like Tiger Woods describes it. He'll go, there were these moments when I would start to black out. Now, he wasn't going unconscious and passing out. He
Yeah,
just
yeah.
doesn't remember taking these shots.
Yes.
In baseball, the ball slows down, it's coming at you at the speed of light, but they have such a great sense of control and
Mm.
presence. And it's not about hitting the ball or needing the ball to go out of the ballpark. It's almost like allowing it to go out of the
Mm.
ballpark,
Mm. Mm.
right? Getting out of the way.
Mm.
And so that's been the most wonderful part, is that
Mm.
you're helping people to get to this point where it's about them, but it's not about them. You
Yeah.
know, if once you start to allow something to be bigger than yourself, then you'll get a higher level vantage point to see things clearer.
Yeah.
And then you get this even, I talk about the superhuman strength. We hear about these stories of mothers lifting cars off their children to save them,
Mm.
right? Where does that come from? We can't explain it. What if we could tap into that?
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I love that. And it made, as you were speaking, it made me think of the Bradley Cooper film Limitless, where he obviously takes these tablets and he's limit. And I wonder if that's what it would be like to gain access to your full 100% consciousness, because Bruce Lipton's work talks about how 95% of our time is spent in the subconscious, and I just wonder if that's if that's what's happening. Because I think, the paradox here is, and I say this to my wife all the time because she's a singer. She loves getting to that point where she's just purely present and flowing and able to riff. But for her to get to that level of non-thinking, she has to do a lot of reps, a lot of practice, a lot of repetitions. And and I think that's what I think the paradox is, that you got to do the reps so that you shift it to the subconscious, so that with your conscious, you are fully in that moment. And one of the greatest things that kind of Clyde gave me when I spoke to Clyde about 3 years ago now, it still stays with me. He talks about if the Formula One driver would thought about their braking space, they would lose 10% performance. And it's just like, wow, like that's so powerful, because if that's the Formula One driver, like apply that to every single profession. Like we're all just stopping short of our fullest potential. Why? Because we're stuck up here too much.
Exactly, exactly. Because that's what I've found. It crosses over. So when I do get on the podcast and have a chance to kind of share the stories and the
Mm.
before and the afters of the work now, I'll have people from different walks of life contact me to, possibly work with. And it translates into, I have a film director
Yeah.
who getting ready to pitch his film, and he was struggling. And then I took him through understanding pressure.
Mm.
And I said, you realize like every opportunity that you've ever had in your life and will have in your life will have pressure because it's directly related to how much you care.
Mm.
Mind is here to keep you safe. So your mind creates the pressure because it wants to know the outcome before you even start. How's this going to end up? Right? Is it going to
Mm.
be good? Am I going to be the hunter, or is this going to be bad? I'm going to be the hunted.
Mm.
Okay, so that creates this organic experience of pressure.
Yeah.
And so the better you get at handling pressure, the
Yeah.
bigger the opportunities come to you.
Yeah. Come on.
And so he was able to pitch his movie. He got them to green light it. And then we're working, he's on the set and millions of dollars at stake. But what is he doing? He's changed his relationship to pressure, knowing this pressure that's always
Mm.
going to be uncomfortable is where the opportunity is. So he's reframing it. Okay. And he took that into production, and then they released it, and it was the #2 film for Netflix internationally, you know, and now he has the #1 film for Netflix. And so it's been fun to see it translate. That's where I say pressure,
Mm.
performance is performance. So one of the areas that is really fun to do is and I did this just this weekend, I'm starting to give bigger and bigger talks to groups. And so these happen to be business people,
Mm.
a lot of them in sales. And so sales is, say it's about the rep, it's about getting out there and doing things that are uncomfortable, and having some measurements. And so what's cool is to take sports, which is metric based, and then to be able to take these
Mm.
tools and principles and apply them in other spaces where they may be more gray. So,
Mm.
in music, in the arts, an actor trying to get a part, being
Mm.
able to, show up and be in the zone and not take things personally, can be really advantageous. And so when I take my sports journey, I had, my since I started so late, my career wasn't really, really long. So I had like over a decade of just literally sacrificing anything humanly possible for this one achievement.
Mm.
And it comes down to a race that's 20 seconds long,
Wow.
right? So that's why I say, like, for me, I coach from personal experience because not a lot of people will feel that level of
Mm.
intense, application, and then it all coming down to that one moment, you know,
Mm.
and you either make it or you don't make it. But we can
Funny.
all gain from the same tools. You don't have to be in the same experience to, for that to be able to use those tools that worked over here and then, translate them and have
Yeah.
them in the arts or the business.
Mm. There's so much pressure that we put on ourselves to perform in those moments that if you could bring the past of everything, who you're doing it for, all your parents, all your community, you're doing it for yourself, you're doing it for the trophy, you're doing it for the accolade, and I think the thing is that our brains can be all sorts of places in the past, in the future, in the present, all within the half a second. And I guess, what's the gift of having someone like you to speak to? What are you doing with them and their thoughts, and how are you helping them tap into their fullest potential?
Well, I think, well, first of all, I start from what if I was in their position?
Mm.
So I allow, because each person's unique. My coach who coached the best in the world, I'd ask him all kinds of questions about performance. But one I can remember of, what's the best personality for performance out of all the people you've ever worked with? And he said, well, Seth, if I put a dot, kind of like a star map, of personality types, if you could do that.
Yeah.
And I drew a circle around it. He said, all my best athletes are all on the edges. So they weren't one type, but they were, extreme in their own version.
Mm.
So I have to meet people where they're at. And so some people will be just headhunter, right? Just pure warrior. Others are more artists. They're
Mm.
playing the same sport, but they come completely in from different directions.
Mm.
But I love that part about it because I can relate to both.
Mm.
So one area that I think is really advantageous is as you said, the higher up you go, up this greatness uh, pyramid, the differences between the best become smaller and smaller,
Yeah.
usually less and less physical.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you take the Olympics in the final heat, just about everyone in the final heat has a chance at medaling,
Yeah.
right? It will be usually a mental deciding factor in that scenario. And so for me, what I find at this highest level, this rarefied air, like some people will have referenced me as kind of like the people that help guide people up the Mount
A
Everest,
Sherpa.
Sherpa, yes, because I'm in it too. I feel
Mm.
like I have something in this, and I get into the flow, the zone, the moment. I get uncomfortable every
Mm.
session. That's necessary for me because that creates the necessity of us to find the next solution.
Mm.
So I'm in process too.
But
And
you've
so
also been to the top of Everest yourself.
exactly. Exactly. And so there's little tiny, they seem tiny tweaks, like tiny tweaks. And I try to make this point. I'm not going to teach you most likely anything new,
Mm.
but I'm going to remind you of things that you either knew or they make a lot of just, sense.
Yeah.
But because they're simple doesn't mean that they're easy.
Mm.
Because once you get uncomfortable in the pressure, your mind will go all over the place.
Mm.
So I'm going to stay in the simplicity of this and hold the space for us because I know this will get us to the top. And so as we're going through this experience, for me, it will be to keep it simple
Mm.
and then to have an accountability loop because you need someone in your life especially when you're working on things that are simple, to be accountable to be able to come back and just basically like you brought up F1, they download a ton of information off of those cars.
Mm.
But if you get into the car and you see the steering wheel, it's very simple. The gauges are very simple. So they take a ton of information and then they simplify it for the driver in these instrument panels. So that's kind of the calibration that I try to do with people.
Mm.
And what's interesting, this is fascinating because I'm like you, I want to have conversations, I want to learn and grow. And so I had the good fortune of getting to know Sir Graham Henry of the All Blacks.
Mm-hmm.
The All Blacks, the winningest sports organization in history, and 120 years. And I think they have a winning percentage above 70 at least. I think it's close to 72, 75. And So Sir Graham Henry, he's the winningest All Black coach of all time. So pretty significant. That's why I think they gave him the Sir in the first, first part of his name. And so we talk about that going up to the top of Everest, because I get fascinated with not just winning, because I expect us to win. I'm trying to create a lifestyle of winning with someone, so that it's not about making it, it's about maintaining it. Because humans were kind of motivated by discomfort and pain. So once you achieve something, then what?
Yeah.
And I've watched this. I didn't see it coming at first, but then I've watched this with people where all of a sudden they change the rules. So I'm talking to Sir Graham, and I talked about, there's the freshman, the sophomore, so let's say the first, second, and third season of winning. Okay, so the first season is all exciting. Person's never been a part of a winning organization, or they've never won. Very exciting. Oh, wow, I just realized my childhood dreams. Second season comes around. I asked if there was a drop off. So yeah, there's definitely a drop off, right? Because there's less discomfort, less motivation, right? And then, but he said, this is the part I didn't see coming, but it makes perfect sense. He says, but it's the third year where it just plummets. And so what they do in their organization is they plan for it. And so what they do when you go up Mount Everest, they have base camps, right?
Yeah.
And you go to the base camps in the order that they're designated. So you can imagine someone goes to Mount Everest. Oh my gosh, I just went to the highest point on the planet. I realized my dreams. And then they decide they're going to do it again. Mind is always the beast of trying to simplify things, right? And so what is it? It wants to do? It goes, well, we don't have to, maybe it's renegotiating.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to go to base camp 1. Let's just skip and go to base camp 2, which could be tragic, right? There's a reason why there's a base camp 1, 2, 3, and on. And so that's what's been interesting, is just to put in place, basically an agreement, a system that it's not if you win, it's when you win.
Yeah.
And then we have this accountability loop of calibration where the reason you got to the top of that mountain was because we did this.
Yeah.
And we got to stay committed to this.
I love that. Recently I heard Eric Thomas say the lines of, your talent will take you places your character cannot sustain you. And I think that's akin to what you've just said, is that sometimes you need that base camp to acclimatize, to allow the character formation to sustain the level of success. And I think so often we overlook that, don't we? We want the external success. Certainly as a young kid, I grew up and I was always on to the next. I wanted the next level of responsibility and promotion before I was probably competent. My peers would probably look around me, probably a bit wiser, and going, "Cool, already?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll give anything a go." Right? It was my greatest strength, but greatest weakness, because I didn't have the character to sustain it. And I think there's a lot of people out there that have that same mentality, which is drive, 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 drive. But I don't think we're always aware and as conscious of, have I developed the character to sustain this level? And when I started to get successful with this business, for example, and I was receiving all the validation and the affirmation based on, oh, that stuff's intoxicating, right? If you don't have the character to sustain that, then you can start to make decisions that are not conducive to the destination you want to head in. And yes, I can start to see how maybe those year ones are starting to equate success with identity, and then don't do the things. And it made me think that, I don't know if you follow soccer, but there was a German football team, Xabi Alonso's Bayer Leverkusen. They went the entire season unbeaten. And the thing that I think about is that, what helped them go unbeaten? Did they have a identity of being unbeaten when the final whistle was blown on the last day of the season? Or is there something deeper, that they have this mindset and this character and this belief that they are unbeatable? Because I think that one precedes, because if you look at the results and the amount of times they scored in like injury time, like really last gasp, it was like a do or die attitude, right? And I don't know how you resonate with what I'm saying, but you know, and I guess there's a kid, probably why I asked you that first question is that, do you kind of believe in this character and identity formation, and then the results are just the results? They take care of themselves. The outcome is the final thing on the step on the journey, as opposed to the very thing we need to focus on every single day.
Can I say exactly?
Yeah.
Yeah, what I try to get people to focus on is, well, we hear it all the time, the process, especially in the performance space. Focus on the process. What is the process? So for me, really, I like to work with people that want to learn, want to grow. So what's the lesson? So again, it's not if you win, it's when you win. But the thing that really excites me is when someone comes to me after we worked with each other for a while and they happen to win, right? And they start describing all the things that they learned about themselves. And oh, by the way, I did win. And then
Yeah.
we know we're in the space for this to happen
Yeah.
multiple times, because now we have a lifestyle where, confidence, winning, those are byproducts. We want to focus on little things that are process that you actually have control over. Your mind wants to jump ahead. Your mind wants to jump to these big, shiny stories. And so we have to work on maintaining these simple check-ins of, what are you focused on? When you go out there to battle, are you looking at the scoreboard? Or are you focused on where you are and doing what you need to do in that moment? And when you can get people more and more involved in the moment, right, in process, they can lose but win. Right? I have story after story of someone that struggles with negative, thoughts or negative self-talk, and they will end up losing, but they won't have destroyed themselves in the process. Massive win.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I know they just shifted their entire life.
Yeah. 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 Which is a recurring gift. That's a diamond they get to, yeah. One of the things that I've been journeying with this kind of process of mastery is this never too high, never too low. And, to the external world, that might be like, oh, you don't feel. And I don't think it's about not feeling. I think it's about not suffering at the extremities. I'll give you an example. When I first started the podcast in the early days, if I had a big guest on, I'd be like, oh my God, I got so and so on. It's a really big high, right? But then, round about episode 116, an actor called Matthew McConaughey comes on the podcast, right? And I didn't have a massive high, but I didn't have a low. It was just, yeah, of course. It was almost like, this is the long game. This is the process of mastery. Of course, I've had 115 conversations to this point. I'm not conflating my ego. I'm not conflating my identity. This doesn't mean anything other than the fact that it's just a wonderful human going on the podcast. And, so how do you resonate with never too high, never too low?
Well, that's what I try to sell, if you will,
Yeah.
which is curiosity, right?
Yeah.
I try to, okay, so we talked earlier about at the highest level, this rarefied airspace of finding little differences that make big impacts. Under pressure, things magnify.
Yeah.
And so one thing that's really, really powerful is going back to being a kid again. We're in the flow state when we're up till about 7 or 8, we're constantly in the flow state. And then when we're about 10 years old is when we start to wake up and make choices. But we do spend a majority of our time still in the flow state. So I've taken athletes, performers in general, that are struggling. Like their career almost seems like it's coming to an end. I'm talking about the best of the best, first round pick, multiple millions of dollars, and you name it, almost on the exit. And then I just remind them, what was it like when you were 10 years old? What was that? See puck, hit puck, see ball, hit ball, right? Just go out there and run for the simple pleasure of the wind at your face. Take them back to being 10 years old. I get rid of all the storytelling, the past that they're carrying around on their back, the current, the money, the prestige and all that. That sounds wonderful, but it can also be a burden if you're carrying it. It's all perspective.
Mm,
Future, you have these dreams, and why am I not closer to this? And will it ever happen? It seems like it's
yeah.
getting further away. So the future can be heavy. So getting rid of all that and getting back the simple pleasures of being 10 years old.
Yeah. I
And when
love
you're
that.
10, you're curious. You
Yeah.
are constantly moving forward. And guess what? Curiosity is a neutral state.
Yeah.
It neutralizes everything because there's no good in the zone, in the flow, in the moment, being present in your body, out of your head.
Yeah.
You're not even really competing, even though you're competing. There's
Yeah.
no comparisons. There is no high and low. To know something is good or bad, you have to compare.
Yeah.
So when you're at your best, you're not comparing at all. So neutrality.
I love that because even to be curious, the supposition of your posture is humility. It's like, why would I be curious if I thought I already knew it all? So even just to posture myself on curiosity, I'm going to learn something. Why? Because I'm going to learn something.
And
Yeah.
where will you learn the most?
Yeah.
Failure.
Right. Yeah. 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 So do we ever fail?
So I take people, one of the most explosive development stages of a human being is learning how to walk,
Mm.
right? When an infant starts to walk. Well, they say that the average infant falls 69 times every single day. That's when we're developing at the fastest rate.
Mm.
How does that relate to an adult? Adult identifies with falling and says that's a failure. So now it's internalized the result.
Yeah.
So what if we can go back to being that infant and be in that development rate state where it's just a process of processing information? How do I just, as Kobe would say, just get better?
Mm.
It's not about these huge quantum leap, massive wins and all that. How do I just get curious and just get better?
Hmm. Oh, no, I could talk to you for hours, my friend. I could talk to you for hours, but I want to be super respectful of your time. I have a word here, always better than yesterday. It's called Heartprint, and the word really kind of reflects the ripple effect, the legacy, the difference that we make in the lives of other people. And Seth, I just wonder if you take a moment to maybe preflect, come to the end of your days, and what do you hope your Heartprint will be?
I would say I get the chills when someone just tells me that they were happy doing something that they love and they did it under pressure and they just wake up to the possibility of that. So for me, it's when I speak to a room full of people, I see them become little children in front of my eyes because they go back to that wonderment of, well, what if I did unlimit my potential?
Yeah, yeah, that's powerful. And isn't it funny? Isn't it? It's so funny how so much of that is to not learn more and more and more, but unlearn all the things that were never truly us or never serving or limiting. And oh, what an irony! What what an irony! But thank God there are people like you that are walking alongside people. How can they find out more about your work? How can they get in contact with you? How can they book you to speak or hire you? What sort of things can they get from yourself?
My full name is Seth Pepper, so SETH, and then pepper like salt and pepper. So .com. So website is probably a good hub. It all the platforms, more or less, the social media platforms with my name at Seth Pepper. I like to talk to people,
Yeah,
so I'm open to talk with anyone and everyone. So just reach out, create a connection, and have a conversation.
love that, my friend. Thank you so much for your time. Be honored if you leave us a final thought from your good self.
Final thought. Just challenge yourself to unlimit your potential and be curious and go back to being a kid again enjoy, live in joy.
Love it. Seth, appreciate you, brother.
All right. Take care, brother.
Hey, my friends, thank you for making it to the end. I hope that our time spent together today has left you a little bit better than before you push play. I'd really appreciate if you just took a moment to leave a review to allow me to meet more people where they are and hopefully leave them a little bit better too. If you're curious to know how I, through Always Better Than Yesterday, can serve you, your team, your organisation, then head to alwaysbetterthanyesterday.com to connect. And while you're there, let me know 1 or 2 things that you're going to do as a result of listening to this conversation. I absolutely love hearing your thoughts, your reflections, and the things that this spark in your own heart and mind. If you want more insights from my heart and mind, I do send out short episodes on a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday and Friday, and again, I hope that they serve you well. I appreciate you listening. I'm Ryan Hartley, host of the Always Better Than Yesterday podcast, a podcast for heart-centered leaders just like you. Keep leading, my friends. Always love.